Hi, let's talk about Fly-by-Night's tutorial. First, let's talk about where the player starts. I use Mario's level 1 as a reference to great tutorialization. The empty space to the right and the wall to the left in Mario teaches the player that they move to the right. Fly-by-Night has a big focus on vertical movement. So, I use the same technique as Mario, but translated vertically. Now, there is a wall to the left and a wall to the right. Both are visible, so the player can tell at a glance, oh, I don't just move to the left. And I don't just move to the right. I must move upwards. This is also the point of all the empty white space above the player. Now let's talk about the game's flight mechanics, which are similar to Kirby's, where you can jump multiple times, but each successive jump is smaller than the last. I wanted to teach this mechanic early in isolation and with little punishment. So, this first jump is very easily clearable, with just a small tap of the jump button. But the second platform requires a player to hold the jump button in order to clear it. This is like Mario's pipes, which each get taller to teach the player to hold their jumps. After this first platform, the player must learn how to jump multiple times. No matter how hard they hold the jump button, they can't reach a second ledge. But when they try, it's quick and easy to get right back where they were. If a player understands the need to double jump, they can even skip the first ledge. Once the player reaches the second ledge, the camera pans up to reveal a much larger jumping challenge, which was previously hidden to avoid overwhelming the player. Once the player reaches this final platform, there is a single, small jumping challenge to conclude the tutorial about Fly-by-Night's flight mechanic. Now let's discuss the combat mechanics. The player can attack in the direction they're facing, or upwards. They can also do a powerful downward attack while in the air. I wanted to introduce combat one direction at a time, and in a safe manner, to avoid frustrating players. So, the first thing the player has to hit is a wall that can't fight back. This wall takes 2 hits to destroy, which creates a heuristic I rely on throughout the tutorial. Next, to teach a player about their downward attack, I placed blocks below the player, forcing them to learn how to do their down attack before progressing. The downward attack is also much stronger than the player's normal attack. To showcase this, I placed 2 walls for the player to break through, which the downward attack does with ease. I felt the most appropriate time to introduce enemies was while introducing attacking. Enemies are introduced with many heuristics in mind. The walls prevented the player's progress, much like the slime does here. The button above the slime, which I'll discuss in another video, is used to teach attacking at the previous wall, associating outcomes from the first wall with this slime. The layout of this room also replicates the layout of the destructible walls, which leads players to think that they need to attack to the right and do a down attack to progress. These slimes are also the first thing that's animated up and down, just like the player, which tells the player that this thing is different than anything they've seen before. One concern I had when introducing enemies was that players might think the slimes are NPCs, especially since our game's description talks about saving their friends. To counter this concern, this enemy does not attack the player, only harming them if they touch the slime. This enemy, just like the wall, also has 2 health. To reinforce that the down attack is stronger than their normal attack, there is now an enemy below the player. This enemy looks and behaves the exact same as the first enemy, but it's defeated using just 1 down attack. The tight corridor for this down attack also teaches players that they can do their down attack while falling, and they don't need to jump to use it. The next directional attack that's taught is the upward attack. This is the least common attack used in our game, but it can be quite helpful. I reused the idea of the walls by placing one above the player, forcing them to attack upwards to progress. Before heading into the final section of the tutorial, the player must remember their flying mechanic, which went unused during the combat tutorial. The final section of the tutorial combines all of the elements introduced: cherries, flying, and combat, but it also introduces the idea of enemy variations and crystals. Freeing critters from their crystal prisons is the primary objective for the player, and is the final part of the gameplay loop, so it's introduced in the final part of the tutorial. Freeing critter relies on players attacking the crystal, which is reinforced by the abundance of enemies and the color of this crystal being so similar to the slime's color. The gameplay loop is completely introduced when the crystal shatters, removing the wall that prevents the player's progress and opening them up to the world. In hindsight, I don't feel confident about introducing the enemy variation alongside the crystal, because I think it distracts from the introduction of the primary objective quite a bit, especially since this variation is used in the hallway immediately after the tutorial. But I learned from my mistakes, and I'm eager to make the next tutorial with Fly By Night in mind. Thank you for watching.